So I was just at my buddy's housewarming. He's one of the lucky ones, and he bought a house recently. And we were over there, and I'm meeting a bunch of people that like I've never met before, having a generally like pretty like solid fun time. And and I'm talking to this one guy, and totally naturally, like they're talking about it, not me. This guy starts talking about video games and like how his brother, when his brother moved out, took like the Xbox, and so he's like I just want to like get like Skyrim again. I really want to try Elden Ring. Like I started it was really hard, and I just don't know, like it's really hard to like follow the story in that. I was like, dude, actually, like fun fact, that company started out as a productivity software company. And this guy's like, dude, no shit. And I'm all like, yeah, let me tell you a little bit about like how it started, the Japanese bubble economy, all this stuff. And he's like, no bullshit. This is fascinating. I was like, bro, do I have the podcast for you?
Wait until next Tuesday, my friend. I almost actually a coworker who I don't know super well, who was talking about Helldivers 2, like a lawyer was talking about Helldivers 2, which was kind of weird in the first place. And I hope he gets that it's satire. I don't know anything else about the game, except you're not supposed to take it at face value, so I hope for the sake of America that he is not. But he mentioned Dark Souls, and one of my other coworkers was like, Dark Souls actually started, it's based on a PS1 game called Shadow Knight, which is... he's mixing up Shadow Tower and Kingsfield into a game that doesn't exist. It's like 5 p.m. on a Friday. And I'm just like kind of digging my nails into the palms of my hands. Like, don't do it. Don't do it. You have pages of research on this, but do not say anything.
No one's more of an expert than you are, Tyler Kubat.
I ended up I was like, the door to go home was the other direction. I left. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll send him a Teams chat on Monday and go, hey, man, listen, I just want to let you know, you're so wrong. You're so fucking wrong.
Hey, I saw you say this thing, you fucking moron. Why don't you listen to my podcast where you could listen for 90 minutes, me break down step by step how wrong you are. You're the perfect audience for it.
Yeah. Welcome to Of Mics and Memory Cards, a complete rundown of the PlayStation 1 game library, all 4,105 of them. My name is Tyler, and I drive a 1994 Toyota Corolla that has some metal pieces in the trunk that roll around when you stop or go too fast. Today I'm joined by...
My name's Jacob. I drive a 2013 Subaru Outback 6-cylinder, and get this, today I changed my power steering pump.
And my name is Kameron. I don't have a car. I take the bus to work, but when I was in high school, I had a Mazda 3.
And today we are talking about Gran Turismo, the best-selling game on the PlayStation 1, much to my surprise a few episodes ago. Now, has anyone played the first Gran Turismo before, or any of the series?
Not before we were talking about it for this episode.
No, I remember when, I think it was for the PS3 when Gran Turismo 4 dropped, and it looked beautiful. And in my mind, Gran Turismo always was like, I know it's like famously a racing simulator, but I always thought that it was like one big track across the world, like almost a post-apocalyptic landscape where the entire world is beautiful, but there's just like one road that only you get to drive on, and that's just what you could do, and you could just Gran Turismo around the entire globe. And I was like, wow, that sounds like a really neat game, and then never ever played it.
And I don't think that game exists, not as Gran Turismo.
I think Outrun is something similar, because I don't think you actually race in that game. I think you just drive with a time limit.
In Outrun, there's a time limit, but it's not like post-apocalyptic. You got a hot babe on your arm, driving a red...
driving by the ocean, got palm trees. I'm pretty sure that's somebody's apocalypse.
I've never played Gran Turismo before this either. I remember Gran Turismo 3... was maybe a PS2 launch title or came out around the start of the PS2. I just remember seeing ads for it.
Yeah.
So, like, in every EGM, there was a Gran Turismo 3 advertisement. And I want to say there was some TV stuff, too, but I was so removed from racers that I just had no particular interest in it. So, diving into it for this episode, I didn't realize just how big a deal Gran Turismo is. Not just this first game, but Gran Turismo as a brand, but also, like, as a lifestyle. Gran Turismo means a lot to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I think that a lot, like, racing games were something I still really associated with the arcade.
Yeah.
You know? And that's where I would go to play a racing game. Playing it at home, it just never really, especially, I think for a very brief amount of time, I might have had like the PS2 like race car attachment, but it was kind of a hassle to set up. And it wasn't, I didn't have enough racing games to really use it for, and it's no good in Burnout 3 Takedown, one of the greatest games of all time.
Second that,
but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, so it was just never really a thing that I got into on the PlayStation.
I saw a program on TV like a long time ago, just talking about like the greatest games of like that generation or something like that. And Gran Turismo 4 was one of them. And it was shot like a documentary style, but the person they decided to speak to for Gran Turismo 4 was just like a casual, well, not a casual player, but a player who got his dream car within the game. I think it was like a Mitsubishi Lancer or something like that. And he tuned it up, tricked it out, everything. And then the end of that documentary for his section was that he ended up getting the car IRL to like match everything he did in the game. And he finally like has the car of his dreams now. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Were you just watching Pimp My Ride?
Maybe. Yeah. It was weird that Exhibit was there for some reason. He put like 500 PSPs in the trunk.
Well, let's name some of our sources for today's episode. The biggest thing was a film, like an actual documentary movie called Kaz, Pushing the Virtual Divide. This was supposed to be on Hulu. I couldn't find it on Hulu, so I found it on YouTube, where PlayStation has uploaded it for free. There's also a PS blog post from October 13th, 2017, which goes over the making of the Gran Turismo series in general, and then a YouTube video just called Making of Gran Turismo, which is, I believe, a PlayStation Underground upload. So when PlayStation Underground would send out those demo discs, they also had little digital previews. I think we brought one up for Silent Hill, and they had one on the original Gran Turismo as well. And that, along with other cobbled together sources from the internet, various interviews with Kaz, who we'll get to who Kaz is in just a second. It's pretty well documented, but there's also a bit of contradictory info here. The weird paradoxical thing I'm learning as I research some of these larger games is that the more well-documented a game is, the more contradictory information there is, because different people remember things differently, or perhaps there's a reason they couldn't talk about something in 1997 and now they can talk about it pending the release of the most recent Gran Turismo. So if there's a couple inconsistencies in here, I've done my best to point them out when they come up, but other than that, I'm sorry about everything. So Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo for the PlayStation is one of those quietly revolutionary games, despite being the best-selling game for the PS1. Full stop. It reignited and revolutionized a genre. In fact, the only racing game you could argue is more important to the overall history of racers is Pole Position, the OG arcade racer from 1982. It's the kind of title you only see from a craftsman, and represents the kind of perfectionism and precision you see in particular in Japanese art. It's a series that links up gearheads, folks who marvel at the game's graphical fidelity, and folks who just like a solid racing game. In short, it's a game whose own hyper-specific niche managed to not only break through to the masses, but turbocharge it into one of the most successful franchises in history. It is the 24th best-selling game series overall, at 90 million copies sold across all titles, and the best-selling PlayStation exclusive series of all time. That's the thing that threw me off. I would have thought maybe God of War, which, to be fair, is on PC, but even still, Gran Turismo is the PlayStation's top-selling brand.
I've never heard of Pole Position, so I guess that ties in. I've never played Gran Turismo, never heard of Pole Position. I guess I'm just not a racing kind of guy.
It's that old
All we know is Mario
I mean, that's
Kart.
all I knew.
All boys know is Mario Kart, Crash Team Racing, Burnout 3 Takedown, and Lie.
I'm going to throw in Diddy Kong Racing as well.
Fair. One of the greatest N64 games.
Honestly, unironically, yes.
There's such a discrepancy between being the 24th best-selling game series and then being the number one best-selling PlayStation exclusive series of all time. I'm really having a hard time squaring that circle, because is not the PlayStation 2 the best-selling console in history?
I believe so.
Right.
And yet Gran Turismo, which only had one game on the PS2 and
I think 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, okay, 3
Yeah.
and 4. Okay, got it. So 3 must have been at the premiere of the PlayStation 2, and then Gran Turismo 4 towards the end of its run.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. It just wrinkles my brain. That's no ifs, ands, or
I
buts
would think
about
it's
it.
because you have the entire circle of like Tyler said, an entire circle of gamers who are really into racing games, and then you got the entire circle of car fanatics who are seeing a game with all these different brands of cars, all these different makes and models, and a game that fine tunes each car as accurately as they can to their IRL counterparts, and it just kind of created this huge clash. And this was also in the 90s, where street racing was probably at its peak of popularity, so it was kind of the perfect storm of all of those of all those components.
We are in a pre-Fast and Furious world, which surprises me a bit. Although maybe that's more like the burnout crowd when the need.
Yeah,
because
I'm thinking I'm thinking of Initial D, and especially in Japan, the street racing and drifting scene was absolutely huge at this time too.
Interesting. I had no idea.
To find out why the series is so wildly successful, the answer in many ways lies with the director, Kazunori Yamauchi, who usually just goes by Kaz, which is what we're going to refer to him as throughout this episode. He has been the director for, I believe, every title that the company has released, except for Gran Turismo 3, which just, doesn't list a director. I assume he directed it, and I don't know why he's not listed. He is also an actual race car driver, beginning his career in 2009. Gran Turismo is a combination of his influences and ambition, and absolutely could not have existed without him.
I love this idea of someone who's here's something I actually hear a lot from the mechanics that I work with, who are obviously, by nature of what they do, very big car people. A lot of them grow up with a fascination for cars, for racing, and that's what they want to do. But racing, like so many other hot ticket kind of celebrity items, is one of those things where you kind of have to be born into the money to be able to do it. And if you're not, and maybe you can get away with it by being all this is my sole interest from the time you're 8 years old, and you kind of start on the track and you can kind of build it up. But if you come around to it in your early 20s, you're already an old man by the time you're gonna be racing. And so it feels to me here that Kaz is someone who's all I love racing, I couldn't afford to do it, so I made this game series. It made him hundreds of millions of dollars, and then he's all great, now I can leverage that into doing what I actually love, which is risking my life going 180 miles per hour in a circle for hours on end.
And he wouldn't have it any other way.
Honestly, I think that's a pretty good assumption. We'll get into some more bits about his character in a minute, but I like to think that maybe he was if I make enough polygons and if I make this look real enough, maybe someday I can just jump into the screen myself and ride off into the sunset.
You gotta see it in order to be it.
Yamauchi is the CEO of Polyphony, also originally known as the Polys team, an internal development team with Sony Interactive Entertainment. Since the release of the first Gran Turismo, they have only made 2 non-Gran Turismo games, and only one game that isn't a racer, which is Omega Boost, a mech fighter in 1999, which we'll cover at some point. The other being a racing game called Tourist Trophy in 2004, also for the PS2, which is a motorcycle racer. Polys was formed into its own studio entirely following the Japanese release of Gran Turismo and called Polyphony. They were then credited as Polyphony for the USA release. So their first 2 games, which we'll get to as well, and the Japanese release of Gran Turismo 1 were credited as Polys team, whereas when we got it, they were Polyphony, and they have been Polyphony ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
There will be a test later. We should also mention the other key player in our story, Shuhei Yoshida, now head of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios. But back in the early 90s, Yoshida was given the assignment to form the PS1's initial game lineup. He's more of a businessman than anything else. He has an economics degree and was with Sony as early as 1986, obviously not making games at the time. His first credit as a producer is actually on Crash Bandicoot.
Wow! So he did Gran Turismo and Crash? This guy looks like he's in for a bad time in the driver's seat.
But also is probably swimming in so much money. This man's got to be pretty rich as well.
Oh, money and much else.
Gran Turismo had a 5-year development time with an initial team of something like 4 to 7 people and an eventual $5 million budget, starting development in 1992. And it sounds like a grueling process, at least for Kaz himself. Here's a quote from him about that time.
In those 5 years, we could not see the end. I would wake up at work, go to sleep at work. It was getting cold, so I knew it must be winter. I estimate I was home only 4 days a year.
Sounds like my time in the nonprofit industry.
Ayo!
Ayo, take that. Me for 7 years in my past. Now, it sounds tough, but Kaz was seen as an eternal optimist and used that positivity to push and motivate his team. I also found an interview with Kaz from a PlayStation Underground demo disc from 1997 where he says he goes home twice a week. So maybe he just means that he was only completely home for 4 days a year. So he could just be exaggerating, or he could have been lying to sound more impressive. Either way, my guy worked hard as fuck to get the project done.
I'm pretty sure on the Japanese calendar, a week is divided into about 182 days. So if you went home twice a week at a rate of a week being 182 days, then yeah, you'd only be home about 4 days a year.
That's Japanese businessman math. Kaz math. Now we're going to jump back in time just a smidge. Kaz was born August 5th, 1967 in Kashiwa in Japan's Chiba prefecture, and we're just going to keep calling him Kaz. I feel like we often cover folks who are delinquents, want to be rock stars or outsiders, but Kaz is not. He was the straight-A student who dreamed of becoming an astronaut and describes his friends as a group always trying to one-up each other. Kaz was also artistically minded from a young age. He described once the walls of his childhood house being lined with large sheets of paper so he could draw anything he wanted, and when the pages were full, his parents would take them down and replace them with new blank ones. Around age 14, he and his friends started making films, too.
But here's the reason for that. I don't know if you saw this when you did your research, but I actually read this outline and I had certain questions, and I found out that it was actually his younger brother went missing, and then the mom, she just drew on crayon papers all around the house until finally realizing that there was a map to a world underneath the Chiba prefecture loosely based on Dungeons and Dragons. It's crazy.
And inside those tunnels were just miles and miles of racetracks. And Kaz said, one day, I'll go fast enough to chase those demo dogs and get my brother back.
That's the demo disc.
So they're just like spinning demo discs. He's like, what is a PlayStation? Maybe I'll find out in 20 years. That's the PlayStation Underground.
Fucking damn it.
You remember whenever you start up the PlayStation 2, how it like shows you like the inner workings, like a rendering of the inner workings of the PlayStation? And it's like blue, it's dark. It legitimately kind of looks, it's the same color scheme as the whatever
the
it's
upside
called,
down.
the upside down in Stranger Things. So I think maybe the original PlayStation is the upside down of the Chiba prefecture.
I think we got it, boys. Everyone watch your backs tonight. Watch your heads for little red dots. They're coming for us for learning the truth.
And then the last thing worth mentioning here is that inside the upside down of the Chiba prefecture, you know what you're likely to find?
Asamine.
Asamine is in the underground prefecture of Chiba. There we go.
Writing their 2 games in mysterious silence. No, set to very thematically relevant synth music. Anyway, Kaz, where were we? Kaz always liked cars. He always liked cars ever since childhood, but not as a greaser, a speedster, a gearhead. I get the feeling that this is the classiest guy we've discussed so far. Today, he's described as a keen photographer, a collector of good red wines, and a fan of the Tour de
So
France.
basically the antithesis of Tobunobu Itagaki.
Yes, exactly the opposite of the man we talked about last week. At least I hope so. I don't think Kaz has any sexual assault claims against
I
it.
sure hope not. He's too busy for that. He's too busy racing cars for that.
Do you think Itagaki, being the opposite, is a collector of good white wines, or do you think he's a collector
Just
of
terrible
bad
wines. He
red
just looks for the
wines?
cheapest shit on the shelf, all the way at the bottom, just straight down touching the floor.
He only drinks, what are they, Calimochos, the red wine mixed with flat Coke.
Oh.
I think that's what those are called. I drank a couple in college. I'm not embarrassed to admit it.
If there
You're
was,
supposed to use the worst red wine possible, though. That's what I've heard anyway.
if there was ever a time, it was college.
Now, he did not start out driving cars professionally either. In the Kaz documentary, which was Kaz Pushing the Virtual Divide, he professes that he didn't start racing professionally until well after he'd been working on the games, probably getting behind the wheel for real around the mid-2000s. Here's another quote from the film by Kaz.
I actually learned to drive on Gran Turismo before ever driving a real racing car, so that the feeling of being at one with the car was something I gained from Gran Turismo first. I discovered later, when racing real cars, that the feeling was actually correct. It was just something that confirmed what I had envisioned.
You gave it so much oomph. In the movie, he's like, I actually learned to drive on Gran Turismo before ever driving a real car. His expression is totally flat. I mean, he speaks in Japanese, so maybe I'm missing some of the tonality, but you really...
He only really feels something when he's behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah,
just...
talking about it, it really can't capture the passion.
It's not the same.
He gets behind the wheel, his eyes turn red, his eyebrows light on fire. Speed Demon by Michael Jackson starts playing.
Gotta go fast.
He is speed. Ka-chow, ka-chow.
Wow. Kaz in the early 90s joined Sony the same year they formed Sony Computer Entertainment. But the question, why games, right? Now, Kaz actually joined Sony along with their music team. But why music, right? I can't find a lot of solid information about it, except that Sony's original game development team was really small, almost an afterthought. So it wouldn't surprise me that anyone with even a passing interest would be moved there. More so than that, though, Kaz is kind of the driven individual that might have seen that he could make the kind of game that he'd always wanted to make if he stuck around long enough. He did profess to an interest in 3D graphics around his high school years, having made wireframe games himself around 1983. But even from the beginning, he had a fairly clear image of the car sim that would turn out to be Gran Turismo in his head, but he was told by the higher-ups at Sony, who probably weren't car people, that it just wouldn't sell. They were wrong.
And they were wrong all the way to the bank.
His first directing credit is Hidden Gem Alert Sky Blazer for the Super Nintendo. It's pretty good. It's a good little 2D platformer. It's very colorful. It's very bright. I recommend it. Go pirate it today. Following this... Don't pirate it. Following this, or around this time, he was drafted by Yoshida to help with development of Sony's upcoming system, and Kaz made some suggestions on that initial PS1 controller design.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, dude, that's some big legacy right there.
He was in it from the start for as... Well, I was going to say for as little as you hear about him, but there's a whole ass documentary about the guy. But I feel like he isn't one of those really outspoken designers. Like, you see Kojima on Instagram, you hear Itagaki talk shit about Tekken. You only hear from Kaz when you ask him a question. It must be asked for him to answer. He won't provide information on his own.
You don't find him. He finds you.
He is neither seen nor heard.
Just in the dead of night, my eyes closed, I hear the revving of an engine outside, and I go, Kaz has come for me.
He's like the Grim Reaper.
He said, you got some information wrong on your outline. I have some notes that we can discuss over a nice glass of port. I like to imagine he's the Frasier of game development.
So far, if he's the classiest guy, bar none, he is the closest to Frazier of anyone we've discussed thus far.
And maybe Yoshida is his Niles. Yoshida, this car racing sim is fruity and precocious.
Ah, yes, fruity and precocious.
I stole that from a 30 Rock joke. What's interesting here is the PS1 was not announced to the public as being published and built entirely by Sony themselves until October of 1993. While the console had technically begun life in 1991, that was when the PlayStation was going to be a Super Nintendo add-on. Nintendo dropped Sony the day after their initial PlayStation announcement in what is commonly considered to be the biggest video game-based betrayal of all time. And for a number of years, the console was essentially considered to be dead, though more work was going on behind the scenes. This was when Nintendo shifted to work with Philips for the CDI instead of continuing with PlayStation.
God, what a big ass blunder that was.
It's like shooting yourself in the foot, but with a nuclear missile.
Like Nintendo literally created their biggest villain in that moment. Top 10 anime betrayals.
That's what makes the story so cinematic. If it were anything else, it would just be disappointing. But this is history.
PlayStation is in their villain era. 34 years. Villain
and they've
era.
never stopped.
So Kaz then shifted to development for the PS1. And so we're talking around 1992 here. I'll let him explain his reasoning for the next game he worked on, which was not Gran Turismo.
I came up with the idea of making a video game with a different experience, and we hid Gran Turismo within the game while maintaining the look of video games that were popular at the time. It had the title of Motor Tune Grand Prix.
Ah, yes. Motor Tune Grand Prix, a game that Kaz straight up admits steals the look and gameplay of Mario Kart, while the team tested other racing mechanics inside the engine they had made with the express purpose of creating Gran Turismo later on. Motor Tune 1 came out exclusively in Japan on December 16th, 1994, to middling reviews. And if you look at the cover on this thing, you'd see bright red cars with eyeballs, robots and birds in trench coats, and yet the team focused on things like making the car's suspensions actually work, and attempted to simulate the dynamic forces as cars go around corners. So imagine if Mario Kart controlled realistically.
That's such a Chad move, like making a secret game within your kind of okay game.
It's very Exhibit. Yo, dog, I put a game
So
in
you
your
can game while you game.
So you can play a game while you play this game.
Oh my god, I can't believe I just shot back in time 14 years to when that meme was relevant.
We brought up Exhibit earlier. It's a through line. The through line of this episode is Exhibit is designing everything behind Kaz. It's his hype man. Motor Tune Grand Prix was rushed to completion and was forced out the door about 2 weeks after the launch of the PlayStation 1 system. Despite the game underperforming and being somewhat middling in reception, a direct sequel came out 2 years later, this one also releasing in America and doing that annoying thing where it drops the 2, which makes it very hard to research. So in America, we have Cartoon, or whatever it was, Toon Grand Prix, but there isn't a number attached to it, even though we got the second game. So here's my theory on Kaz's timeline, because he talks about the game taking $5 million and 5 years to build, but all this time these other games are coming out. So when Kaz talks about those late nights, I think he and the team would develop Motor Tune during the day, and then he and the team would work on what would become Gran Turismo during the off hours. So maybe they'd break for dinner and then just come back to the office and continue to work on GT within the other game that they were building. I get the feeling as well that Yoshida was in on this with him, and by the time Kaz and Yoshida felt confident enough in the work they'd done on their real passion project and showed it to Sony executives, the suits got behind it in a big way, more or less telling Kaz to just start his own company as a second-party developer. Kaz describes this as being released into the world.
Do you suspect that these guys got like drunk on sake or I don't know, whatever kind of beer, and came back, like went to dinner as you suggested, got a little bit drunk, came back to the office, maybe a tad bit liquored up, and then designed the game, because I think it's absolutely hilarious if they created the world's most realistic driving simulator.
Under the influence?
The whole game is a DUI waiting to happen. I feel drunk when I play it because I steer in the game as well as I would if I was fucking plastered. Now, this team only ever grew to 20 at most by the end of development. Kaz collected many of these workers through what I would describe as pure riz.
Let's go.
Yoshida describes this as
a charm and charisma to make people believe that he and the team can accomplish an impossible-looking task at the time.
Some of the coders he approached were folks who had specifically written articles about car physics engines. He was collecting a kind of Avengers team of car and computer engineers. And it wasn't only Kaz sleeping at the office. This was a common occurrence for most of the team. Yoshida recalls,
the atmosphere was sort of like a college club room. I would wake up in the morning and there would be a leg in front of my head.
The name of the game was Realism, and one of the team's greatest challenges were car manufacturers being unwilling to disclose data regarding the vehicles themselves. For these cars, the team would make educated guesses, assumedly based on the cars they did have access to, and then comparing and measuring stats by proxy.
That's a lot of work.
And if Kaz was the guy keeping everything accurate, then Yoshida was the one keeping things fun. He was the guy who was not into cars, and often showed Kaz the tester sessions where normal players would continually crash into walls. Reluctantly, Kaz would sometimes be forced to change things for the quote-unquote regular players. And I don't know what he changed, because I keep crashing too. I'm really bad at this game. The team rented 30 cars and only crashed one. Whatever car it was, and the article didn't say, it was crashed by visual effects programmer Takashi Yokushi. Despite this, Yokushi developed the first instance of real-time mapping in video games, which means that there were realistic environments reflected back into the mirrors, windows, and the sheen of the car itself, rather than the imitation of a reflection using a stand-in texture. So what this means is, like, previously when you'd see a mirror in a game, it wasn't really a mirror, it was just a fill-in texture designed to look like a mirror. With Gran Turismo, as you race by things, you see reflections of them in real time and what they actually are, not just like some sort of changing pattern as well. This is really advanced for the system. And if they were testing this in like 1992 with Toon Grand Prix, like that's incredibly advanced for that time period.
I mean, I remember playing Control on the PS4 and then hearing about how it ran on the PS5, and that the water on the floor in Oldest House is reflective in the PS5 version, and thinking like, yo, like that is so fucking rad. And now to think that it was on the PlayStation 1 is crazy. And this does kind of go back, obviously, because we've now been releasing episodes. I've been listening to what we've talked about in those early episodes. And I just love this era in gaming so much, because what people wanted to do, what they could imagine a game being able to do, but that technology either couldn't quite do, or it just was like coming up just ever so slightly short of it, meant that people were so close to realizing like these visions that they would really push for it and try things. And I don't really have a reason to feel this way. It doesn't change the fact that I feel this way, is that now maybe it's because everything feels so limitless that like the actual imagination of a programmer or game director nowadays, it's like, yeah, who really has the imagination to say like, well, this is what I imagine games could really be? Because right now it feels like games already kind of can be anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's almost, it's not like we've hit the absolute ceiling of graphical fidelity, but we've hit a point where it is becoming so difficult to look at something and immediately go, well, that's a game graphic, or that's a CG like an FMV graphic, or that's real life. There have been points where I've looked at a CG render and thought it was a photograph. And Square would start flirting with that kind of shit in like 2001, 2002 when they were trying to approach realism, but it would usually be like a static image. Mm-hmm. Whereas now I was playing through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which has very stylistic characters who don't look real. They're sort of anime, sort of real. It mixes somewhere in the middle, but doesn't fall into Uncanny Valley. But the environments themselves, especially the natural ones, I'm in the like Costa del Sol area, look so real. And I remember just sort of walking and being struck and watching the waves pop in. Like I literally stood at the beach for a little bit and just watched water in a game.
Just let it all soak in.
Which doesn't happen to me very often. Yeah. And I just had that thought of like, this feels like a real location. You could maybe take a screenshot, remove the characters, and say, I took this on my vacation to, I don't know, Puerto Rico or something. Like, it is weird. And so that idea of not even having a reflective texture like 30 years ago in a game is so foreign. We just don't have anything sort of like that happening with games now. It's all like particle effects and ray tracing, I suppose. But even then, do we hit a point where like there is no improvement possible?
We might.
It seems like we're
we're getting diminishing returns just with graphical fidelity or whatever. Like we can't. It does feel like we can't take it much further. We're gonna have to start going into like maybe highly stylistic territory with graphics in order for them to stand out.
Right. And what's funny with, to tie it back to Gran Turismo, I don't feel like you hear about the series as much these days, even though they look gorgeous. The most recent Gran Turismo, again, it looks very realistic. But I don't know that that is as impressive a selling point anymore as it was in 1997 when this came out. And you can see that in some of the Gran Turismo scores, like the actual review scores. There's some other weirdness about that, especially with the most recent game. But folks are no longer as impressed by graphics as they used to be. And I think there's always been the folks who like to go against the grain and say, I don't care what the graphics look like as long as it's a great game. But it's sort of silly to deny that there isn't at least some influence that graphical design has on you as a player, which is also what's so interesting to go back to these games removed from that. And one of the things we've got in outline later is this game still fun to play despite no longer being a technical marvel necessarily? Mm-hmm. And I look forward to your answers. But we should probably get back on track here. The game that formed has 120 cars and 11 racetracks. Each car was measured and tuned to the millimeter. The sound team recorded about 40 different cars, and one of the sound guys says that he put around 200 laps into a racetrack just sitting in the passenger seat recording.
Holy shit.
The soundtrack is completely different between versions. The composers on the Japanese version are Masahiro Ando and Isamu Ohira. I can't find anything on Ohira, but Ando is a jazz guitarist who has previously worked on the Arc the Lad games and has remained with the Gran Turismo games up to the present. Those two series, by the way, are the only ones he's ever worked on. Gran Turismo and Arc the Lad, which is a very strange combination.
Batting 100.
We'll also cover Arc the Lad at some point, 1, 2, and 3. Now, in the USA and Europe, the soundtrack was much different, featuring more licensed music from popular alternative artists. This included TMP, Cubanate, Ash, Feeder, Manic Street Preachers, The Chemical Brothers, and Garbage. A later soundtrack album called The Sound of Gran Turismo would release and include songs that were not on the game by David Bowie, Blur, the Dandy Warhols, and others. I am not completely sure why this was done, except that Sony obviously had a music label as well and saw a way to capitalize on the game's success. I think they probably just took some of the biggest artists that they had on their label at the time, threw one of their songs in after getting approval, and then pooped a disc out along with the one garbage song on the original Grand Theft Auto Gran Turismo soundtrack, and we're just like, here, make us more money.
Now, you refer to the Garbage song as being from the band Garbage, not the song itself being garbage.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, the song is actually very good, but the band is called Garbage. The game was also the first fully designed to support the DualShock controller, though I really cannot find much in the way of how this affected development. If it was forced on them or accepted by them, etc., I figure since Kaz worked on the PS1 controller in the first place, he may have had a hand in developing the DualShock as well, and especially with a game that required such precision, I wouldn't be surprised if he was like, I really want to turn the car slightly to the left, not all the way over to the left with the button. But I'm not sure. I couldn't find much information on it. Like any perfectionist, Kaz still wasn't happy with the final product. The PS1 CPI wouldn't allow them to reach their initial goal of having 12 cars in each race. Additionally, Kaz believed that both sound and AI were compromised by time, even if they were superior to their competitors as well.
You know, I'm glad that there's only six racers total, because I would have been completely just demoralized by getting my ass kicked initially by 5 other racers rather than 11 other racers. Like, I was doing incredibly poorly at the beginning. Just like you said, like, I feel like I was drunk trying to turn or take these corners and just finding no way to keep up with any of them. I would have probably quit, like, early on.
I cannot stress how much I have, Cameron, the exact same opinion as you.
Now, at some point, the folks from Sony must have listened to Yoshida enough to realize that they had something big here. There is no other way they could have justified the fucking price tag on this thing. Still, there's also no way that they could have predicted just how big a hit this thing was going to be. Gran Turismo first released on December 23rd, 1997 in Japan, and then May 8th and May 12th of 1998 in Europe and the US respectively. As we've mentioned before, it would eventually move 10.85 million copies and be the single highest selling PlayStation game of all time.
And that, my friends, is my cue to ask you what you think the number 1 highest grossing movie on the weekend of May 12th, 1998 in North America was. And if you don't know, let me give you a little bit of a hint here. In 1998, a strange phenomenon happened, and it happens every now and again in cinematic history, where 2 movies with ostensibly identical, or at the very least similar plots, get released. You might argue that at one point in gaming history, Gran Turismo and Forza fit this model. The highest grossing movie that weekend was one of those 2 movies.
Armageddon?
Is it the other one?
If Gran Turismo is Armageddon,
is it Deep Impact?
Then in this case, it's Deep Impact.
God damn it. I shot my shot.
It was 50-50, man.
You went for it, and yeah, you tried to make that turn, and you ended up getting spun right back around.
Oh, man.
That was an awesome hint.
That was good. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I'm getting better.
Gran Turismo was also critically lauded and is still, on occasion, declared one of the greatest games of all time. For what it's worth, it sits at a 96 on Metacritic and received near universally high scores from every major publication at the time. The only one I could find below a 9 or a 90 being GameSpot, who gave it an 8.6. It took home awards for Best Racer, Best Simulation, and Best Graphics from a number of places, and was, in 2017, deemed the best racing game of all time by those cranky British assholes at Top Gear. In short, it was celebrated by everyone, made Sony a truckload of money, and paved the way to their most successful series ever. So what did we cranky American assholes think of it? Well, guys, how did you enjoy your time with Gran Turismo?
Well, once I learned like the ins and outs of it, I really enjoyed my time with it. I spent most of this week playing it, trying and like actively working to get better. I went to complete the the B license. I kind of gave up doing the A license because that shit is just absolutely impossible for me at this point. But I did a lot of the arcade side of it, and then I went into its career mode and finished like a few of the like Grand Prix in there. But yeah, I can see why it's considered one of the best racing games of all time. If I had played this at the time, my mind would have been super fucking blown by everything that it had to offer.
Yeah, and similarly, I spent a good amount of time with it. Not quite as in-depth as Cameron, but I wanted to get good. Picking it up, I really thought that there wouldn't be, and especially for a game that's nearly 30 years old, I thought even though I'm not like a prolific like racing game guy, I just thought there's no way this game's going to offer me something that I haven't really experienced before. And it totally did. Like, it felt brand new in my hands playing it, even though obviously the graphical fidelity is not there anymore. That really fades away because like it's the physics engine that is so compelling. And maybe it's the fact that like I've never like if you probably handed me Gran Turismo 7, I think is the newest one, I would be completely at a loss for exactly what to do. But just the handling of the car, I at one point I was playing it at work, and one of the mechanics comes up and he's like asking for a part from the parts desk, and he sees me playing the game, and he just immediately is all like, yo, and throw this out here, Kameron. He was wearing an Initial D t-shirt
fucking
when this
go.
happened. And he's just like, yo, dude, he looks at my like car and he's like, bro, dude, is that the Nissan 8180X Type X? And I was like, yes. How the fuck did you know that? Just barely looking at the screen. And he's all like, dude, I just love my Nissans. Or if you've seen the movie, your Nissans.
Nissan.
I hate that. I was watching this British show, not the Gran Turismo film, the excellent cinematic masterpiece starring David Harbour and Orlando Bloom, but I think it was called The Devil's Hour. And there's these detectives, and they kept being like, "We're looking for a red Nissan." And me and Kat were like, what the fuck is a Nissan? You know, and we thought it was like this UK only developer or something. And at one point they have it written on one of those, you know, we got to find the killer boards with all the strings and things connected. And it had the Nissan logo, and me and Kat both just go, Nissan, oh my god. For like 4 episodes.
I would have never known without the Gran Turismo movie that Nissan is an actually like impressive company, because the first car I ever bought, not the first I ever owned, my parents bought me a car when I was in high school, but the first one I ever purchased on my own was a Nissan Juke. And it's the worst piece of shit ever. I spent 5 years paying it off, typical car loan, only for the week that I got the title in the mail for the engine to die.
God.
At like 78,000 miles. It fucking blew.
My first car was a Chrysler Sebring, the same thing that Michael Scott from The Office drives. And I think that's all you really need to know about it. I believe it went through like 3 engines before we finally gave up on it.
That's impressive. Wow.
It shouldn't have survived as long as it did, and I shouldn't have kept it as long as I did. But boy, I love that car. Piece of shit that it was. I loved it.
But it was your piece of shit.
People like us, we develop attachments to like the worst things. And actual car people would be all like, no, if I drove that hunk of junk, I would drive it for 10 miles and then get rid of it. But we're like, no, but I love it.
I have a question about actual car people. Did they name their cars?
I'm sure most do.
The guys I work with don't really name them, but there is like that like kind of sort of, I'd argue like kind of boomer mentality where it's like, oh, she's a beaut, or it's all like, yeah, that's my baby. They're personified in a way, but I don't know anyone who names theirs. Although some of my coworkers listen to this podcast, so they'll hear this and then they'll
send in the names.
No, Jacob, you're a fucking idiot. Yeah. Charlotte has treated me well for 9 years.
Write into us and we'll read it on a Patreon. Send in the names of your cars. My Sebring was Dante the Anti-Chrysler, and that's also a joke I stole from Futurama, but I was very proud to have a named car. But maybe by naming it and by attaching it to a joke that I found very funny, I formed that attachment with a car that I should have just driven off a cliff.
Is that the episode that's based on the it's one of the like multiple like horror story episodes based on the Stephen King book where the car like haunts Fry?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Great episode.
And then Bender turns into it's the Where car episode.
That's what it is.
And they go to, I think it's assigned to, I don't think they say it out loud, but they go to like an old abandoned Chrysler building, or not Chrysler building, but like a Chrysler factory, and it just says anti in front of Chrysler. And I thought that was cool because I was 16.
And he didn't believe in God.
Still don't. We mentioned the licenses. We should specifically refer to the fact that Gran Turismo has 2 main game modes. So there's arcade, which is just a traditional racer. There's single races. You only start with 4 races, and you have to clear them each with an A, B, or C style car. So I believe it's front wheel, back wheel, and 4-wheel drive is what separates out the letters, but I never could really tell offhand which ones were which. But you have to beat those 4 courses with the 3 types of cars, then you get more courses, and then you finish those, and then, hey, there you go. That's how you finish that type of the game. But there's also the simulation mode, which is what it's called in America. In Japan and PAL regions, it's called the Gran Turismo mode, and this is where things get way more sim-heavy. To do any of the Grand Prix or any race that means anything, you have to get a license. And the first B license, you do the most intense training mode of all time. The first one is just like learning how to brake, I think, right?
Yeah, you have to like brake within the end space without going over.
Which is crazy hard within the time space that they give you, because you have to floor it and then start riding the brake like something like 50 feet before you hit it. And so I just remember every time sliding, and I did this challenge like 15 times, like, okay, maybe if I hit the brake now. No, that didn't work. Maybe if I hit the brake now and turn a little bit to try and like slide into it. But then, so there's 10 challenges like that to get the B license, and then you realize that there's an A license and then an A+ license, and those involve even trickier turns and doing them within a set time limit. And Cam, I finished the B license, but I never finished the A.
Yeah, I didn't either. I stopped on A because the 3rd challenge for that one was actually making me upset, and I got kind of cranky about it, and I let it ruin my day. But because that one I think you have to take on 2 corners. You have like a short right turn, and then you hit a straightaway, and you have to basically floor it as best as you can, and then you have like a longer, more like a sharper right turn, and like I can take it a decent amount. Like I drift a little bit, but I don't do it fast enough. I can do it fine. It looks okay, but I'm always a second late, or like a split second over the time limit. So I gave up. I'm like, I'm doing it right, but your standards are too fucking high, video game.
This kind of reminds me of I did not do any of these races, and for me to learn, because I was often, as you were, Cameron, watching 5 cars drive past me and being stuck perennially in 6th place. But I at a certain point I was getting good enough on those single races to like largely keep up, and I eventually got like pretty good, and I could win those tracks. But to get there, I would watch when the other cars would engage their brakes. So that way, and a lot of it was really learning the map, which did in fact make me feel like the character from the movie. But I wanted to say, oh, you know what? Actually, I will save this. I'm going to save this point for my recommendations at the end of the game, or the end of the episode.
But yeah, the control of the game does not feel natural to controlling a car in a game. And that's paradoxical, because I think it's designed to feel like you're actually driving a car. We go back to the Armored Core thing, where you're not playing as the car, you're playing as the driver behind the wheel of the car. And so you have to brake way early and not speed up in the middle of a turn, because you will spin out, as I often did. And when you get stuck in that spin and it goes like 2 or 3 times, and it's just, I'm trapped in this, I don't know how to escape this. And I forgot to bring this up earlier, but recently driving my 1994 Toyota Corolla home from work, it was a heavy rainstorm, and how I get home if the highway's too crowded or like some back country farm roads, and generally I can go pretty fast on those roads, not as many people take it, but there was this one corner that I took too fast. And as I rounded the corner, I felt my back start to drift out, and I started to twist to the left and then twist to the right. And, I'm tossing the wheel back and forth, trying to right myself and alternating between the brakes and the gas. And I did the full spin. I did one full spin and managed on a pretty narrow road not to even hit the garbage cans that were sitting out. But my thought as I went backwards in the road for just a half second went, oh, this is just like in Gran Turismo. That was my actual thought as my car spun out.
They call it a racing simulator, but for Tyler, it's just a spin out simulator.
Oh, God.
It's a life simulator. I fail as much in Gran Turismo as I do in real life.
Oh, no.
Which is to say I aced every course. You're welcome. But I was fine. I didn't hit anything. Just to follow up on the story, if anyone was worried about that, I slid a little bit into a ditch and managed to stop, and just, the hands gripping the wheel. And I was listening to, get this, Us. I was listening to the Crash Bandicoot episode as I spun out. And so we're still talking as I'm white knuckling the steering wheel, and it's just us going do 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 do, and then, I'm just panting.
It was actually the Ooga Booga that scared him, and it got him to spin out in his car. Excuse me, sorry, I just need absolute silence for a quick moment. Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Jacob from the podcast you're currently listening to. We just wanted to take this moment to say that Tyler did die in that car crash, but thankfully we had enough recordings of him that we were able to create an AI that can accurately not just repeat words he has said, but imagine words that he will say. And so from now on, Tyler Kubat is an AI, and the real Tyler sadly perished listening to episode 2 of Mics and Memory Cards, and his last thoughts were of Gran Turismo. Thank you. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcast.
Why do my hands look so weird? It's like I kind of know what a hand looks like, but can't quite draw it.
Oh no, he's becoming self-aware.
It's Skynet.
I just begin to talk in the TikTok voice. Controls are X to accelerate, square for regular brake, and circle for handbrake.
I hate it so much.
So in the simulation mode, you make money from the Grand Prix. I think they call them cups. It's usually 3 races, and there's a qualifying solo race first, which determines your position in the starting lineup. I was always in 6th because I would always mess something up. I feel like I was able to win races because I could just nudge other racers. I played dirty. I knocked them off the road and was like, get out of here. And
just fucking drive in front of them and they try to pass. Yeah.
Laid out spike traps, did some real speed racer shit.
Threw some blue shells at them.
This is a leftover from Toon Grand Prix. He left the blue shells in. Missed it, Kaz. And then you make more money, and then we should also say in the arcade mode, you can play whatever car you want, or at least most of the sports cars are there from the start. Whereas in the simulation mode, you start with a piece of crap and then have to make money to buy new cars. You can sell cars, you can buy parts. Again, to me, it's a lot like Armored Core, actually, that you spend a lot of time in menus crafting your ideal build and then selling things and repurchasing things and then testing it and going, well, that was a terrible build. I shouldn't have done that in the first place. Then you go back to the drawing board and try out missions. And then eventually, through enough trial and error, you maybe win, or you're like me and you give up and play the next game that we're going to talk about. And then the map it shows, there are specific dealerships, which the cars change out apparently every 10 in-game days. I didn't realize there were in-game days until I read that.
I didn't know that either.
But there's also super special cars, so it's got the standard stuff, some used cars that you can get that must have some wear and tear on them because you do need to buff stuff out on your cars sometimes. You can wash your car for 50 credits, which does nothing but is purely cosmetic. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the sim mode. And then there's like full write-ups on every car as well, so you get your lore dumps on Nissan.
Lore dumps are accurate. This game is extremely playable.
So let's talk about, we really talked about the controls enough, I think. I would not use the handbrake very often, which felt like it would always just send me into a spin. It was really just accelerating and braking. And I would be interested to play a game like this with the actual like wheel setup. I would love to play a racing sim, and like I've always kind of wanted to like take a NASCAR, like a stock car around the track a couple of times and like really get up to the 100, 120s or whatever, but I'd probably crash and die. But I would think it'd be fun to do it in a virtual environment, but using that with a PS1 controller, doesn't necessarily replicate that.
It's not the easiest thing.
I changed the controls, and I found my gameplay got significantly better once I did that. I just did the like the Forza controls where I used what would it be? I used R2 to accelerate, L2 to brake, and then I changed the gear down to square, the gear up to circle, and then X became my my emergency brake, which I also didn't use very often. But once I did that, it felt better to control. Like I started, not being in last place as often, and that's the best I could do there.
That's a really good idea. I should have tried that. My favorite thing was, again, playing on the PSP, the thumbstick, which fundamentally works as L2 and R2. It's like shifting gears, but that's exactly how it would be in the driver's seat as well. So as soon as I needed to shift, it was just like a quick flip of the thumbstick, and then I was in gear 2, gear 3, and I was fucking zipping across that map, dude. It felt so good.
Ka-chow, ka-chow.
Did you both play it in manual?
I
did once Jacob was like, oh yeah, I race in manual, and I'm like, okay, well now I have to race in manual.
Yeah. I
should have tried that. I only raced in automatic.
Manual, I kid you not, like automatic, the game was harder for me. For whatever reason, I think putting it in manual allowed me to like, it's all a simulation. It's all just about like making it as like realistic as possible. And so when it felt like there were things that I could kind of just casually ignore putting it in automatic, it's like the more things I had to futz around with, the more attention I had to pay on the screen, the more in it I was, and the more I was really treating it like I was racing, and it became, I was there. If you've seen the Gran Turismo movie, when he's in the zone, the car kind of forms around him. That's what I felt. That's the most accurate interpretation of the feeling of playing Gran Turismo that there is. And I apologize for once making fun of it, because that shit is accurate AF.
And you get more control of your car too.
Reminds me of the movie Gamer.
With Gerard Butler.
I went from gamer to racer.
But yeah, when you're in manual, it'll help you with taking those corners too, because you can just shift down, and you'll be able to make those turns. Because I think if you go with automatic, it'll shift down, but not to the point where you get that kind of control.
I hadn't thought about that at all, because it was the turns that were killing me. I was like, braking's not really working. I don't know when to speed up, but a downshift would have made a lot more sense. Do you both know how to drive manual in real life?
I do now.
I don't.
Now that I've played Gran Turismo.
I tried learning for a little bit, but I didn't get very far in it. All my cars have been automatic. I've never had the opportunity to like really, really learn.
I have wanted to. I especially kind of regret that I don't know how, and I am going to fix that in the coming years, because in 2020 I was buying a new car, and I've been kind of wanting to get a truck again, because I used to have a truck back in high school and college, and I've been wanting to get a Toyota Tacoma. And they're all super fucking expensive, except if they're manual transmissions, in which case they're very affordable. And I'm all like, I should just learn so I can get the
I would love to learn. Like, I honestly would love to learn, but I also kind of don't, just based on principle, just because of Some people, not all people, but some people that drive manual are so fucking smug about it, and they just think they're better than you. And it's all like, well, why would I want to do the harder version of something when the easier version of something exists? And it's like, if I learn to drive manual, like, am I gonna become like you, or will I actually like be cool and like not give a shit about how other people drive? Because it like bothered me on a personal level, because I would just be like, oh yeah, I drive a car, and I don't know why they would ask, but they're like asking if it's standard or if it's automatic, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's an automatic, and they're like, what do you mean it's an automatic? And I'm like, hold on, buddy, it's not like my car fucking killed your family, just chill my guy. And like, I can't believe you never learned how to drive standard. And again, I'm like, I've never had the opportunity to. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like it was presented to me, you know? It's not my fucking fault.
And you grew up on an island.
And I grew up on an island.
Like,
where cars roam wild and free, and you have to just catch the ones that you can. And I just happened to catch an automatic on the island. There was no other option at the time. Now, speaking of cars, there's a lot of cars in the game, and I listed out the manufacturers that are in Gran Turismo 1, and I know about half of these, like Dodge, Honda, Nissan, Toyota, but then I don't know what like TRD is or TVR is. Are those like fancy sports car manufacturers? Jacob, do you know?
no, I don't. I wish I could be better here. Yeah, I know Acura, Aston Martin, Chevrolet, Dodge, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Nissan, Subaru, Toyota, but I do not know Bismo, TRD, TVR, or no, those are the three I don't know.
Aston Martin sounds fancy.
That's a
Are they
Bond car.
fancy?
Yeah, that's 007's car.
Oh.
Wow, you really don't know anything. That's
I
amazing.
really don't know anything about cars. Or James Bond, apparently.
We actually had an Aston Martin come into work recently.
Oh, that must have been sick.
And it was so sick, dude. That car was so rad. I would have done some things.
I would have done unspeakable things to that car. Man, if I was alone with that car,
I would have been full mass, baby.
Okay, so let's talk a bit. When we glanced on it, but the dilemma of Gran Turismo 1, is the game still fun to play? Would it hold up now with all the other Gran Turismos still available? Now, I don't think any of us have played the other Gran Turismos, so it's a little hard to talk about that in isolation. But let's just say, like, Burnout Paradise exists, and that would be the game I'd rather play. The Forzas exist. Is there still a reason to go back to Gran Turismo 1 in 2024?
I gotta say, I don't know if you're a gearhead, if there's a reason really to return to Gran Turismo 1. But I really liked it. I had a very fun time playing it. I wanted to get better. I enjoyed that challenge. And this is an iconic game. In many ways, Gran Turismo sort of feels kind of like Final Fantasy VII, a game that you can return to even if there are graphical improvements, gameplay improvements, because it captures such a specific vibe. And it might not remind me of my childhood, and it might not give me that kind of nostalgia, but I still think there's something undeniably unique about Gran Turismo, and that makes it worth going back to for me. I was surprised by how much fun I had with this game.
Yeah, same. I was also very genuinely surprised by the amount of time I ended up putting into this game overall. And I actually have played the second. I've played Gran Turismo 2 a little bit just to try it out. I was curious, and that one leans more into the simulation part, where not like the game mode, but it leans more into, like, physics wise, it's more of a simulation racer than the first game. The Gran Turismo one still, you can still get away with some of the. It's not as realistic as the second game, so I think I would still choose the first game over the two, but it's just overall a good game. It would be hard to, like, try and sell someone on it who hasn't played it before, who's played other racers since then, unless you want to go, unless you want to say, oh, for like historical purposes or like just to see where this whole niche started. Like, definitely go back to Gran Turismo 1 here.
I'm gonna be the dissenting party here. Of the games that we played, this by a fairly wide margin was the game I have enjoyed the least. And I am not saying that I feel the hate flowing through the internet to grab at my ankles like some sort of demon from hell. It's not that I think it's a bad game by any means, but with the particular sensibilities that I have, it just never captured me. And I have a similar problem with games like Dark Souls, where I hit a number of failures where I just sort of like toss my hands up and go, I'm good. Like, and that was with there weren't a lot of points in Gran Turismo where I failed so thoroughly that I felt destroyed. The A license stuff, I hit a point where I just went, there is no way for me to do this. Kameron, I hit a point where I got mad at it too. But with like the arcade mode, I had an okay time, I guess. But I think I tend not to click with simulators very much in general, but I also don't tend to click with things where you do like a repetitive action over and over, and that's what I felt like the races began to turn into for me. And I didn't feel myself improving, and I don't think that's on the game. I think that is on me, or however my brain works, or however I processed it. But I don't know, man. I played as much as I could to feel like I got kind of a complete idea of the package as a whole. But there came a point where I was just like, I'm good. I'm like, I wanted to move on to the next game. And maybe some of that came with, I was excited to get to the next game we're going to talk about, but I haven't really felt the desire to like go back to Gran Turismo since. But maybe it's just because I was only playing an automatic. Maybe if I swapped to manual, I would feel differently. So it's tough. I land on it. I land on it being a tough recommendation, like a tough sell on people now, but I'm also appreciating the legitimacy of the two of you really enjoying it and thinking, I don't think it's on the game. I think it's on me not clicking with the game, not the game being
and Kaz specifically, but Kaz and his team had a very clear picture of what they wanted this game to be, and the game itself is just very unapologetic of that. It's like for a specific set of people, and I think they knew going in like this was only going to resonate with that specific set of people, and you know, for those that it doesn't, they're like it's fine. It's going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
I'm here to say no one out there is any less of a person or any more of a person, depending on your opinions on Gran Turismo.
However, I think it's pretty clear from the three of us that you're likely to have, if you like Gran Turismo, you probably have a bigger dick. That's just...
I did hear a quote from Kaz that said, I specifically designed this game for men who have at least 7, maybe 8 inches. Flaccid. Anyone less than that, I would recommend just go play Forza, you fucking cuck. I can't believe he said that in the documentary. They didn't bleep anything out, and he said it in English, looking straight at the camera.
You should have included that in the outline.
Hard as a rock himself.
Really wild. Yeah, they panned down, and it was just for a full minute.
He must have been drunk on so much high-quality wine at that point.
And it was huge. It was like a Willem Dafoe size.
Yeah, it was really, it was weird. It looked suspiciously similar to Hideo Kojima, just the man.
It had sunglasses and everything. So with that, we enter the recommendation corner.
The recommendation corner.
If I was going to recommend a game, since I don't know if you guys, an option for recommendation corner is just to recommend the game itself and say, just go play it. For folks like me who may not be as tied to the sim aspect of it, I mentioned Burnout Paradise earlier. That is in no way really a similar game to Gran Turismo, except that it involves a car. But I like Burnout Paradise quite a bit. It's very open world, and you just kind of drive around and find missions at every stoplight, and then just go. It's the exact opposite of this because there are no sim mechanics. So for the people out there like me who don't like the sim aspect of it, but still want real cars and not Mario Karts, that's my recommendation, Burnout Paradise.
I'm actually going to recommend, it's a game called Grid Legends. It came out in 2022, so it's a couple of years old, but it's still really good. It's made by, developed by Codemasters, who are pretty much top of their game when it comes to racing games, or maybe even like racing sims. They also did the Dirt games and the Formula One games, or the F1 games. But of those three, the Grid series is probably my favorite of theirs. Grid Legends specifically because it has an awesome career mode where it's kind of like a documentary about a racing team. All the cutscenes are like full motion videos with like actors and everything. It even has fucking Ncuti Gatwa, who is, the 14th Doctor in Doctor Who. He was one of the Kens in the Barbie movie. He was also in Sex Education. But he plays one of the characters, like one of the racers of one of the other racing teams, and he was like probably one of the better parts of the game. But I got so invested in the fucking story of this game. Like you root for your main character, and you really want the villain to fail. It's so fucking good. I highly recommend playing this just for the career mode itself. But it's close to Gran Turismo in that it's I would say it's a racing sim, but it's also just so much fucking fun. You can you race. You can do like regular cars. There's also open wheel cars. There's trucks you can fucking drive. It's great. It's really good stuff. Good stuff.
And me, I'd recommend the Pinewood Derby. No, I'm going to throw out kind of an odd choice here, but give me the chance to defend it. I wasn't really sure what I was going to recommend, and then it kind of came to me this episode. It's a game that I happen to be playing right now. It's called Sifu on the PlayStation 5. It's not a racing game. You are.
So wondering how you're going to connect this.
I can see it. I know exactly what Jacob's going to say. I know exactly what he's going to say.
We will find out. So, to me, the the simulation of racing in Gran Turismo and the difficulty of controlling the car, but nonetheless it is rooted in a very specific relationship between the player to the controller, and how you how you get the car to do what you want it to do depends very, very specifically on the inputs that you make on the controller. And Sifu, despite having absolutely nothing to do with cars, is for the martial arts what Gran Turismo is for racing. And it's the inputs, the ways in which you are responding to your environment. And although it's not, realistic, it's not, or the graphical fidelity is not realistic. Nonetheless, just the motions you have to make, the way that your character is controlled, and the way your car is controlled in Gran Turismo feel like they are of one mind. And that is why I would recommend, if you like not necessarily racing, but just the simulation element and how rewarded you feel in Gran Turismo for just honestly, sometimes just finishing the track regardless of place. But then when you get, first or second place, I think there's a very similar feeling when you can beat the boss in Sifu of each level. So that would be my recommendation.
I will give you that getting first place in Gran Turismo feels good in a way that getting first place in Mario Kart does not. There is a much greater satisfaction with struggling, but I don't want to struggle. I just want to win by pressing X. And there is my 30-some white male privilege showing.
Hey, that white male privilege has been there since the 20-somethings as well.
Even as a little baby, I was like, wah.
White privilege.
Come up with a joke. There it is. I heard that in Sifu, you actually don't play as a fighter. You play as the brain controlling the fighter. Which
you got
is
it.
Why the inputs.
You don't play as the fighter. You play as the hands of the fighter. Truly, I think we can all agree that Sifu is the Gran Turismo of fighting games.
And Gran Turismo is the Dark Souls of racing games.
Oh, I wonder if we were going to make that joke. I was going to hold off on it, but I'm glad someone said it.
And Kaz's work schedule is the Dark Souls of being a person. All right, let's talk about the legacy of Gran Turismo, and there is quite a legacy here. Gran Turismo is probably the easiest game to find for the system. There are, after all, probably still around 10 million copies of it out there. I got mine in pristine condition for $16 in this economy. Now, interestingly, though, the first game has never been re-released. It was not available as a PS1 classic on the PS3, the Vita, etc., nor was it ever on their mini console, but it's pretty easily explained through licensing. Because so much of the game is tied up in car and music partnerships, any of those re-releases would also be subject to that and would require new contracts, NDAs, etc. It's also pretty likely that car manufacturers aren't super keen to perpetuate advertising for cars that are now woefully out of date. Because of this, your only option for Gran Turismo 1 are getting the old disc or sailing the high seas, if you know what I mean. Of course, the game series only grew from here. Gran Turismo 2 came out for the PS1 in 1999, we'll get to it eventually, and new releases continue now, usually with 3 to 5 year gaps in between. I noticed that the games have received a slightly chillier reception since the PS2 days, where God damn it, I can't read this line. It's the GT that throws me off.
Don't think about Gran Torino.
Is that the... Damn it, now... Is that the,
that's
Clint,
the Clint
Eastwood,
Eastwood movie?
Why? And I've
also
seen
about
it,
a car.
I've seen it like 3 times without meaning to each time. That is not a movie you should view, well, maybe even once. I feel like it's pretty racist. I don't remember now. Anyway.
The movie itself is not racist, but he is racist, and there is kind of a racist purview, like, permeating over the film, but otherwise I think it's actually pretty good.
Racist. I feel like if a racist makes a racist film, it's a racist.
It's a racist trying to make a non-racist film, so there's something there, maybe.
And then he cast himself as the white guy to make all the Asian derogatory terms, or just to say all of them as many times as he possibly can within the span of, 2.5 hours.
He was like, it worked for Quentin Tarantino in the N-word, and everyone likes him.
Yeah.
I could do the same thing for me, but he already targeted black people, so I'm going to target Koreans.
I think they were Hmong people?
Yeah, they're Vietnamese, aren't they? Because he calls them Ubers. That's what he calls them.
Yeah, Kameron, you racist.
It wasn't Kameron, it was me, Clint Eastwood. I can't tell the difference between any of them.
Oh, man. This is worse than the Mexican puppet from Toy Story 2.
You just did like a Family Guy cutaway.
He did.
Of course, the game series only grew from here. Gran Turismo 2 came out for the PS1 in 1999, and we'll get to it eventually, and new releases continue now, usually with 3 to 5 year gaps in between. I noticed that the games have received a slightly chillier reception since the PlayStation 2 days, where Gran Turismo 3 was also an absolute explosion of sales. The most recent entry, Gran Turismo 7, was criticized heavily for its predatory microtransactions and always-online DRM. And in an example of fancy lad Kaz being a little out of touch these days, he responded to the critique by saying that cars reflected the prices of their real-world counterparts to convey their value and rarity. That is a quote.
That is such bullshit. Oh my god. What a transparent bullshit. Oh my god.
Trying to make them NFTs without really saying they're NFTs.
A few days later, they did make changes to the in-game economy and actually paid early adopters of the game in-game currency valued at about 10 real-world dollars. But that aside, Kaz remains a pretty well-respected figure in the industry. That was sort of the worst thing that had happened to them, or the closest that Kaz or the Gran Turismo folks ever got to being quote-unquote canceled. But they fixed it pretty quick, from what I understand. Then, there's the real-world connection and legacy of Gran Turismo. As stated before, Kaz is now a real, actual racer, but GT as a simulation is realistic enough that it's spawned a slew of them out of fans as well. This is most apparent through the show/training camp/advertisement GT Academy, which takes players into a race car boot camp with the ultimate goal being a career with Nissan. Likely most famous of these 22 winners, picked between 2008 and 2016, is Jan Mardenborough, a British racer who does seem like a genuinely good chap. His story is the one portrayed in the 2023 Gran Turismo film, which, as we mentioned, somehow fucking stars David Harbour and Orlando Bloom, with Archie Madekwe portraying Mardenborough. Kaz is actually a major character in the film, but he's portrayed by Takahiro Hira, although the real Kaz cameos as a sushi chef in it.
Nice.
Because of this, the line between game and realism is blurred somewhat with the Gran Turismo series as a whole. The cars and drivers beget the game, and the game begets drivers and cars. What began as kind of a fan work from a man and a team who idolized car culture became a symbiotic relationship with those fields. GT is now inextricably linked to the hobby, sport, and the industry it once idolized. It got there through hard work and perfectionism, so the success is certainly well earned. I think the best way to close out this episode is actually with a quote from Kaz, taken from the documentary about him.
Is Gran Turismo simply a video game? Is that all it is? Gran Turismo is a video game, but I feel that it is also a movement. And the Gran Turismo movement is a process that we share with the players and the fans. We affect the people we meet. They get on the same wavelength as us, and then those people go out and affect or change the world. Thank you once again for joining us for yet another episode of Mics and Memory Cards. Please take a moment to subscribe, comment, do what you do for our podcast, and then, of course, tune in next week when we go over Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And with all that, I'm Jacob.
I'm Tyler.
And I'm Kameron.
And you've been listening to Mics and Memory Cards.